welcome back, everybody. It's good to be back, and we are on to episode 5 of our Along the Road, where we intersect faith and life. And I'm Pastor Josh here at First Congregational Church in Kingston, and this is...
And I'm Katie Johnson, also at First Congregational as the Children's Discipleship Director.
So we're glad you're here, and if you're here early on, we'd love you to drop a comment. Today we're talking about decision-making. Maybe just tell us one way God has helped you with a decision as you move along. We'd love to interact with you. Click the like button, the subscribe button. It helps us, but it also helps you spread the word to other people as well.
Witness. It
is. It's a very good thing. So last week we talked about the will of God. I talked about the will of God, which I thought was very interesting because I talked about, we make plans, but, God guides our steps. And we talked about the bigger picture of the will of God. And we had plans to do the episode together. We had plans to do certain things, but, that's not how it worked out.
There was a curve in the road.
There was a curve in the road.
See coming.
And that is okay. And so I was trying to separate the idea between the will of God, the big picture of the will of God, which is that we glorify him, that we are making disciples, or as he said to Abraham and the Israelites, they were to bless the nations. He would bless them, but then their job was to bless the nation, and that glorifies God. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the will of God, we tend to mix it in with like every little decision, the personal parts of who I am, and what's God's will for me, God's will for my job, this job or that job, or do I marry this person? And I don't see the will of God in that way.
Right, and then sometimes we overthink it.
We do overthink it.
Or we also have been known to make snap decisions without considering anything else at all.
This is true. And any parent who's been angry at some child has probably made a snap decision they've had to go back on once or twice because, that happens. You will never, ever touch that again. And, of course, that's not even possible.
You're grounded for life.
But the will of God last week, I think, opened us to understand that sitting in the will of God means, am I moving in life to glorify his name, to bless others and be that blessing, to tell them the truth? And then all the individual aspects of that, whether you're, like I said, a lawyer, a doctor, a plumber, an electrician, a teacher, everything, all that's within the will of God, because it's more about how you're living out your life. And so I promised that this week it would be more about how we make those godly decisions. And not just decisions, I like to say godly decisions. My mom used to always use a phrase. And so, like Mama said, I like her phrases a lot. She used to say, you're not going to have, especially in the Christian world, one who follows Christ and is trying to make godly decisions, you're not going to have this tough choice between an evil decision and a good decision. You're going to have a choice between a good decision and a godly decision. And that makes it even tougher. Sometimes the evil decisions are like, okay, we know not to do that.
It becomes obvious.
It becomes very obvious.
Sure.
But really, I think where we overthink things, like you were talking, it really comes down to, they both seem good. Which one is godly? What do we do? And then, we'll talk about it a little bit later, what happens when I made the decision and it definitely did not go my way? Did I make the wrong decision or did I not make the wrong, and to kind of to walk through some of that as well. So, what I have here, and I showed you just a moment ago, I found you can go on the internet and find all these different ways to make godly decisions.
I'm sure you can.
They matched up mostly with the way I think, which I think is nice. And I have 2 different versions here. One from a thing called Crosswalk.com is one of their things, and the other one was, I think, a Tabletalk type of thing.
Oh, are we going to put these in the show notes?
I will. I can put the links in there. I think I can put the links in there and have them for people, or I can make these in PDFs if I need to. But what I think is interesting is a lot of them and a lot of other ones have the same basic principles. And they recognize that we have a lot of individual decisions to make. I mean, from the moment, either for me, from the moment I go to bed, because I decide what I'm wearing the next day, the night before, but from the moment you wake up, you're making all those little decisions. I have to make this, I have to do that. And some of them are really little, but I think we're thinking more in the big picture. Do I leave my job this year? Do I take job A versus job B? I have both. Do we have another child? Do we get married? And those seem like life-altering decisions. Mm-hmm. And if you're walking with Christ, you're saying, how do I do that in a godly way? Because they could change completely. Taking a job A over job B could change your geographic location. You could have to move out of the state. You could leave family.
All
There's
kinds
lots
of impact.
into that as well.
Sure.
So I'm going to look a little bit at the first one here, and the first one is from Crosswalk. They have 8 ways, right? Everyone has different ways and amount of ways. 8 seem to be a popular number out there. I don't know why. Their first way is not one I would have started with. I always start with, we have to be in prayer, in communion with God, if we're going to do that. Their first way is one that I actually don't agree with, and that's why I want to kind of bring it out to us. It says, trust that God is going to work out for your good. And so I think this is a common fallacy that a lot of believers kind of dive into. The idea, and it says here, Romans 8:28, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love and are called according to his purpose for them. And so a lot of times we take that to, God's going to work it out for my good, and we assume that it's going to be my material good, my relationship good, and if it doesn't go right, then we didn't make the godly decision. If I took job A and 6 months later that company folds and I have nothing, I didn't make the right decision. It didn't work out for my good. But Romans 8 is not talking about that. It's talking about the purpose that God has for us. It's going back to that will of God. It's going to work out for our good in the sense that we can glorify him better, and we can, show who he is and bless others, even if job A fell apart and I took it. And even if, so you have to, I always struggle with that one because people always say, God's going to work it out for your good. And that one has annoyed me to no end because you can give plenty of biblical examples. How many times Paul and his missionary journeys, did it really feel like it was working out for the good when he's shipwrecked, when he's in prison, when they try to go to Asia and they're prevented? They're trying to do the right thing and they're prevented.
Because we don't always understand what God's purpose is.
Right.
And therefore, we mistakenly apply our own sense of what is good to the situation.
Right. Now, they then, in this list, they then correct some of that by step 2, saying, make your plans his plans. And I think that's more like the more you're in communion with God, the more you're aligned with him, it's as if the more you will ask of God things that are godly. Instead of things that I need, you ask of things that are godly. That's part of the Lord's Prayer, is that your will would be done, Lord. If you're asking that, that means your will be done. If I lose somebody, if this falls apart on me, then it's your will. I'm trusting you in that. And so we can walk even in the most difficult times, knowing that it was still a godly decision. If this isn't aligned up, that you're making, I say like being in communion with him. That's why we start with prayer. I think you always have to start with prayer.
There's a proverb that says something to the effect of, man makes his plans and God laughs.
Yeah, it says God directs the steps.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we mentioned that. You weren't there, but I mentioned that a little bit last week in Proverbs, that we do make our plans. And I said we're supposed to make plans. It's okay to make visions and what are we doing this year? What's my work vision for the next 5 years? What's my family vision? All of that is good. But we hold it loosely and allow God to direct each step.
Be ready to pivot.
Right. And that's what I say. It's like we know we have to make a mountaintop. But as you're going up, the trail divides all different ways. They may all lead to the mountaintop, or there might be a different mountaintop that you end up at, a better one or a more godly one. But you have to walk along those trails and do that as well. They say things I would have said, find people you trust and get their insight. There is a sense of community when you're making a decision. I know moving here in 2019, I did the same thing. Before we even talked about coming to candidate, people that we trusted, getting their insight, talking with them about it, praying with them. And so there's that prayer again, that not just people I trust, but godly people I trust. And I think there's a difference.
Yes, there is.
If you're in a business world, it might be also a good business mentor that may not be someone that may not be a believer, but they do have wisdom they've been given. Maybe they work with integrity and you trust them as that type of worker, but that shouldn't be what everything is banked on. Really bathe it in if it's godly. Because if it's godly, you're not going to worry about whether it looks impossible or not.
That's right. And sometimes it's like being in the fog.
Yeah.
And you can't, you were talking a minute ago about different paths. Yeah. Well, you can't see any of them.
No.
So getting to the point where you are confident that, because the way fog works is if you take 2 steps, then you can see a little bit more.
Yeah.
And they take another 2 steps, and you can see a little more that you couldn't see back here, so that as you go, your decision can become more informed.
Yes.
Or the series of decisions will become more informed. But we have to not panic.
This is true. That actually leads to their next step, and you didn't even know it.
I didn't.
Their next step is every day is a brand new day. Just because, and it's happened to me, you lost a job, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. Tomorrow is the next day to say, okay, God, what do you have for me here? What am I doing next? Well, I know your will for me is to glorify you, even in this loss, even in this grieving, even in this difficult relationship, whatever it is.
Confusion,
the confusion, I have to do that. Number 6 that they have here is very interesting. It's one that I kind of pieced together as if we're understanding who God is. This is like a little bit from last week. You trust the one who sees the beginning and the end. He knows not just all the paths, but he knows where you started. He knows where you will end up.
That's right.
And as we were preaching in this our past sermon here a couple weeks ago, we talked about God calling the Cyrus, the Persian king, to rescue his people in the book of Isaiah. And when he names Cyrus, it's over 100 years before he's born. And so God already knows. And he knows outside of our own generation, outside of our own lifespans. And so it does give comfort in that we can trust that type of person. Sometimes like a good business mentor who's about to retire and they've walked through all of this and they go, we know it's hard right now because you just entered this level. Mm-hmm. And they kind of give you this breath, but they've been there. Yeah. Now take that to a much grander scale to the Creator himself. Mm-hmm. And where that is.
Well, and the other thing is, we sometimes can get into the mentality of, if we make the wrong decision, mm-hmm. we are somehow causing God
godly decisions and just living how you want to make the most out of something, to make the most of your finances, to just not have any worry. Godly decisions mean I am communing with God. I am reading his word. I am praying. I am with others who are doing the same.
And we're listening.
And we're listening. We're pouring into each other's lives that way. That's what here at our church we call growth groups, that are supposed to be doing that, where we can then share that with the group. Oh, I'm having this struggle, or I have this hard decision coming up. I'm not sure what to do about it. Yeah. The step they have there would be that there's grace and mercy for these decisions. And their last step is says when you make a bad decision, God is still sovereign. I think those kind of go together. Mm-hmm. The bad decision is I feel like it was bad because I left everything and I ended up over here and then it fell apart. Or I thought I was going to marry to this person. I don't know how often you've been hunting.
Not
no.
Very often. Fishing, yes.
Fishing,
hunting,
yes.
no.
I used to hunt with some people in Maryland, and one guy, that we were with, it was partially his land, and he knew everything really well. And I know if he were to leave me in certain places, I might have struggled to get back, to where we needed to go.
Yes.
But he seemed to see trails I didn't see. He saw directions I didn't understand.
Landmarks.
He knew the sense of where it was, and I could only go as far as he was guiding me.
Mm-hmm.
And if he were to walk away, or if I were to just be like, whatever, I'll do my own, I may end up lost out there. And I think that's, like I said, a very smaller version of you stay close to God because he's guiding you. And we're walking along, and he's like, oh, we're going to take this trail. But I thought we came from over there. No, we're over here at this time of day. We're going over there. Like, and they know the reasons why. They don't have to tell you.
Right.
And you will get to the end of your journey in that type of place. So I think it's important to understand our relationship with God is, I think, the key to this. Mm. And the key is different than what is God's will. Because remember, all along in the decision-making process, in the I made the decision and it went well process, in the I made the decision it's not going well process, all along the will of God is still that you glorify his name. That you are still witnessing and blessing others through this process of each decision, whether it's buying a car or buying a house, getting a job, getting married, like whatever you call big, and I would even say the little ones. You practice with the smaller ones.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, and to a certain extent, you could say the crucifixion follows that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane,
praying,
I would rather not do this. Thank you very much.
I would rather not do this. This is true.
But nevertheless, he realized that was the will of God, even though there was a whole lot of not good stuff before he got to the other side of it.
That's true. That's very true. So what I'd like people to point to, and I'll highlight this one, I'm sure I'll find the link to this, the second plan follows more how my plan works anyway.
No wonder you like it.
It's why I like it. He says, and I put 1 and 2, he does 1 and 2 backwards for me. I always like to put prayer first. Yeah. And so I'll start with his number 2. Prayer is rooted in the faith that God hears and cares. So I am praying not to invoke him to be like, ooh, that's interesting, let me figure this out. I'm praying because he is intently listening to my prayers. And not only that, he's caring about it. He's not just hearing my prayers, he's listening with compassion to my prayers.
That's right.
And I think that's a perspective that we tend to forget often.
Yes, I would agree.
And if you've worked with any amount of kids, you know that a lot of times they hear you, but they don't listen. And so you understand that maybe I know there are adults that way as well. You're hearing me, but you're not listening.
So how would you define the difference then?
I define the difference as in hearing means that I can repeat what you said. I know the facts.
Yep.
Listening knows I heard that you were stressed during that, or that you were really sad about that. I heard that you were excited about that. And my response isn't going to be to the facts. It's also going to be to the emotion and what I see that you are desiring out of that. It's which is we do imperfectly. Like I say, I'm working on listening. I think I said that a couple episodes ago. I'm working on listening, but that's part of that. I don't just hear you. I listen to your heart and I watch your face and I know your emotions. And when I pray to God, he's doing that, but the spirit that is within me knows even the emotions that I'm still trying to figure out. He already knows that. And so that prayer needs to be pretty open. And I would say when decisions are before you or difficult times, be pretty open with it. I don't know what to do, God. Like, this is so confusing to me. Like, tell him those things. I think being open with that is a recognition that he does care. Because listening adds that component of compassion and care. Where hearing is just like, I'm a robot, I've ticked it off, and I can just do what you said. And I don't want to treat God like a robot because he's not, and he's not my robot, and I can't have him just tick off a list,
So what I hear you saying is listening is a mechanical response.
No, hearing is
hearing is the mechanical response. Listening is listening with the intent to answer back.
Yeah.
In the sense of not, respond and be engaged.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you listen with that intent and you listen with the intent to, it's a common male problem. We listen to our wives with the intent to fix the problem. But if we actually listen to our wives, that you can hear they don't want it fixed, They want an emotion to be understood.
They want some compassion.
Some compassion, some encouragement, and then maybe a solution, but not often. And males, we're just not good at that naturally. We just want to be like, I have your solutions. Just do this, and
we'll move on.
And we'll move on. And then you don't get that listening. That's where the listening comes. Oh, I can see how that would be very difficult for you today.
Yeah.
Even though in the male head you're going, I can fix that in 5 seconds, but that's not what's needed at all. And so that's what God understands of us. So when we pray to him, he's not shoving solutions down our face. He is hearing with compassion and will respond. And sometimes the response is a very clear, I feel where you are. And sometimes the response is, I think you're overreacting to this. This isn't the right time. And that's a loving response because they're hearing that and they can acknowledge how you feel, but say, okay, let's look at this bigger picture. And that's a good relationship.
Yes. And actually, in a book that that I had my Sunday school teachers read over the summer, children and adults in a stressful situation, they need to offload their emotions first. They can't be logical.
No.
Until they've and if you don't give them space to unload those emotions and say, yes, I understand.
Yeah, so you do that with God.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're receiving or working through the decision, you can be more logical. You do need to use your logic. That's what I struggle with. People who are like, well, God will just decide for me. And like that, but there's a logic to it. He does create us with order and logic and planning. Like I said, their rules or his steps are different. Number 1 on his step would be number 2 on mine is to remember that the scripture, God is God's revealed will to our life. It's our only rule of life and faith. He says in Psalm 119, your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. Like we were talking about going along the path. And I have sworn an oath and confirmed it to keep your righteous rules. So this is like my little guide in the foggy trails or my light in the night trails. That I'm using that and I'm filtering my thoughts through that and understanding God's love and grace and mercy through that as well.
Yes, but Pastor Josh, it doesn't tell us whether we should be on social media or not.
No, it doesn't. And I think that's where it does tell us if you choose to be, it does tell us how we should interact, how we should speak with grace, and how we should speak with mercy. It does tell us about our attitudes and our purpose on social media, which I think is a weird word in itself. Social media is a place where people are not social because they're never together. So it's a little funny that way, but God's word would tell us that our interactions there should still be glorifying to him. Whether or not, because a lot of believers and non-believers are out there and they're just what I call, keyboard warriors yelling at people for all these different things. And then when they want to show grace to somebody, people only have a picture of them yelling at them. You would never be that way in person in a public manner because, that's what's comes out. So it doesn't tell us, you make your choice, again, whether you're going to be on or not. And you can walk through some of this and making your choice. But if you are, the principles of going with his will, the principles of being close to who he is, should inform what you type and what you post.
A reflection of him.
And be a reflection of him in that. And that doesn't mean that every post you make has to mention Christ. Right. You could just be out there posting something about a hobby that you do, and it's just a joyous hobby that you do. And there's nothing about that is wrong, and you don't have to put a cross in the picture. You don't have to put all these things, but it does. There's a difference between doing that and making it so much so that nobody knows that you even know Christ, and so there is a balance to that. Mm-hmm. But it's a choice. All these are choices that we have to make along the road. Their third step here is the counsel of godly, mature, knowledgeable Christians who know you well. So just like the other ones, we don't do this by ourselves.
Right.
No man is an island. No man should be an island. And we should have each other within the body of Christ. Hopefully in your local church, you have people that you are with and that you're together doing this. You hear that it says in Proverbs, wisdom is found on those who take advice. Plans are established by a council. So you see that as well. I think of the book of Acts as the early church was figuring things out. they met together to talk about this. It wasn't just like, okay, well, this is what James said. This is what Paul said. This is what Peter said. It was they met together. They had disagreements together, and they walked through that together as they were making their decisions. His fourth step is very much like others. Remember God's providence, God's will. He is directing things around you. Mm-hmm. What you think about those, you may not always like it because it's not always directing things to make life easier for you. I think if it was, we would see the early church, all the life of the disciples would get so much easier as they followed Christ.
Well, and think about missionaries.
And missionaries, and really, it didn't get easier for them. Not more difficult. As you're making these decisions, the fifth step is walk in obedience to the light God has given you already. So instead of going, how am I going to, I got to make this decision. How about in the here and now, we should still be obedient to what we're doing. Even if we don't have the answer to job A or job B or what you're going to do. But you need to be obedient here. That's why we mentioned earlier, we practice in the small things. Yeah. Practicing with your social media. Practicing, with your current relationships at work. We have to be obedient in the small things.
Yep, and sometimes I'll say to God, all right, Lord, I think this is the way you're leading me, and if it's not, show me.
Yeah.
Because this is the way that I'm understanding you.
Right.
So I'm going this way.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to that part at the last point. He's got two more parts, and
sorry.
then the last. No, but. That way, and that's part of the beauty of his creation, and that he doesn't need every single one of us to go get a Christian-based ministry job. He doesn't need every single believer to go be a plumber. He doesn't need he needs us to be in the world.
We're the body of Christ, right?
Yeah.
If we were all arms,
we wouldn't get anywhere. It's true. It's true. So remember that God does give you gifts and talents and desires. He does put desires in your heart. The tricky part is if you're doing all these other things, it's less tricky. But the tricky part is this a godly desire or is this my own personal desire?
Oh, that can be hard to discern.
It's very
sometimes.
hard because they can come very close to each other. Because your personal desire when you're a Christian, when you're just starting, if you're 10 years later, that may shift. Mm-hmm. And it becomes more of a godly desire that it looks different. Yeah.
And that's where the godly counsel is so helpful because they have better perspective than you do on yourself.
It does. His seventh step, I think, is interesting because this is one I don't have in my list and I should. And I think many people should. I usually skip to number 8. So his seventh step is interesting. When you're making these decisions, okay, you're going to move your family or you're going to, that's the type of decision. But any of these decisions, the social media decision, how will it impact others? It's very interesting. In Philippians chapter 2, it says, let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. We've said to our children, maybe you have to yours, before you speak, is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it loving? There was another helpful. Is it helpful? You ask these questions. So in your decisions, how's this going to impact my neighbors? How's it going to impact my children? How's this going to impact the people sitting around me in the pews? If it's at the church, think through the interest of others around you as well. I think married couples should be doing this, but they don't always. And some of those decisions may seem very big to a spouse, maybe to a wife, because a husband's made a decision he wants to leave his job and go somewhere else, and he's been thinking about it for 6 months, and there's been no conversations about, and then hearing how it could impact people and what it is. So really walking through that, and it may end up the same decision.
That's right.
But then you have this.
But that's not
business reasons, and also because I believe God is moving me this direction. And it wasn't an easy decision. Sometimes they're easy decisions.
Yes, that's right. Sometimes it's a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer, and that's true. So I skip that step a lot. So maybe you, like me, we skip that step. I know I do. But the 8th step here is the one that I've always leaned on. And to me, if you're working in this 8th step, you're kind of already involved in a lot of these other things. The 8th step is that there's an internal sense of peace or a lack thereof. In other words, you can't just go, I just feel this is what God wants me to do. There's this idea in Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, that we aren't to be anxious for anything, which is difficult as it is.
Yes.
But in everything, like everything that we do, we bring prayer, we supplication, we bring asking, we bring it with an attitude of thanksgiving or gratitude, and we let that be made known to God. Like it says, bring that request to God. And what he says is, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, which goes beyond all of these things. I think it's always interesting. It says it will guard your hearts. In other words, it's going to protect you. It's a very active word. The guardian word is peace. So they're grammatically connected. It's the peace that is guarding your heart. It's God's peace that is protecting your heart.
From what?
From the world, from the anxieties, from these different types of things, from these decisions. It says it's going to guard your heart and your mind. And so a lot of people put this step in here, but I think the only way you can get there is if you have done almost all these other steps. So to me, it's like, well, what are your decisions? I was like, well, it's the peace. But really, if you think through it, these steps are involved. I tend to skip number 7, which I'll add in now. But that idea that I feel at peace about plan A or about plan B. And it's not just like, I feel good about this, but like there's this sense of peace, no matter how daunting the task, that this is the right direction.
And that peace is recognizable because it's so deep-seated.
Yeah.
It's not just a surface level.
Right.
I feel like I've made the right decision because this is what I want to be doing.
Right.
It's the deep, passes understanding.
Yeah, and I think for most people, when they ask about godly decision making, it's beyond those obvious ones. Those obvious ones are like, okay, I know. This workplace I'm at is asking me to do things that are not good to integrity. I can't stay here.
Right.
Okay, that's obvious. That's the difference between an evil choice and a good choice. And we're talking about good and godly. Yeah. And that peace is a big deal. Like I said, our decision to come here was filled with peace after, spending all these other steps because we were looking for peace. Is this the right time? Is this the right place? We're moving halfway across the country. We're going to uproot the family. There's all these things to consider.
Lots of impact to other people.
Lots of impact to other people. And you're impacting a local body of Christ because you're leaving that local body of Christ. And you're doing all of these things. But there was this point, and the point was before we came to candidate. And there was this sense of like, if that church being First Congregational Church here in Kingston, if that church says, yes, we want you, we were already ready. We had gone through all of those steps. Yeah. And the peace wasn't just mine. That's the thing about that biblical wise counsel. The peace was the peace that I had, that my wife had, and that the few people that were in our circle actually had as well. And they were actually very supportive and hoping that this was the right thing, which I thought was interesting because we didn't know the answer at the time. Yep. But there was peace to it. So when we arrived here, the church could have said yes or no on the candidating weekends that I came, but it didn't matter. I'm at peace. They say yes, I'm here. And if not, I was very comfortable where I was. Not that you always need to be comfortable, but I knew in both instances I was walking where God wanted me to walk. Yeah. Because I was in His Word, we're communicating with other people, we're all these other pictures are there, and the peace is a big deal. That we can do it this way. That wasn't done without personal planning and thinking it through and all the logistics and you still have to run all your numbers and do all of your stuff and very important stuff.
Your due diligence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important. And sometimes, like with the missionaries in Acts, you think you want to go a direction, and God
And it
blocks
looks
that
good
off.
to you.
And it looks good to you,
Yeah.
and God says, no, I don't want. He did, for some reason at that point, he didn't want them to go to Asia, and they didn't shove it through. That would have been a lack of peace, you know. So for some reason, I don't know. And what's interesting, they don't tell us how they knew. All they said is the Holy Spirit prevented us.
Yeah.
What does that mean? To me, that literally could mean it's a lack of peace.
Right.
I don't feel right about this.
Yeah.
And if you're married, you know, and you're both, you and your spouse are people seeking the Lord, you got to listen to each other on that one. You know, because sometimes the person that's involved in the decision just really wants away so hard. That's why the counsel is important. And you listen to a loved one that says, I don't know about this. Or a loved one that says, let's think about this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you're afraid to even think about the decision. Now they're, you know, and so that's all important, but it should be guided by this peace.
Yeah.
You bring it back to God, and you bring it back to God. And the answer might not come for a month or 3 months or a year or 2 years as you're walking through that, but the whole time you're doing all those little steps of the journey until you get there.
Yeah.
Practicing all the smaller things so you can do that.
Right.
Yeah, so those are, I mean, this list will show you, but that's kind of our thoughts on, and I think it matches very well with my thoughts on decision making.
Yeah. So I wanted to, this book was a gift from someone, a friend of mine. It's called Beholding and Becoming.
Very nice.
It's a really lovely book, but it does have some pertinent things in it. Let's see. Part of our issues with decision making is our desire to be in control.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
We haven't really talked about that angle.
Not that angle.
Yet.
I'd love to hear it, yes.
So she says, I like to be in control. Even if my own track record is faulty or untrustworthy, I'm wired to think myself safer with my own hands on the steering wheel.
100% true.
Isn't that what drives our incessant need to know the future and to manage everything in our lives? We call it planning. Purposeful and proactive, but if we're honest, it's often our belief that we know better than God and could orchestrate circumstances better than Him if we only had access to all the variables.
Isn't that true? I think that is a big one, which is why this process, you're constantly giving control to God. He's the one that gives me the peace. He's the one I got to bend my thoughts and will to as I'm working through His Word. I have to listen to the counsel of others and not just myself. You know, all of that is contrary to, I just do it on my own. Or sometimes, like, if I do it on my own and I fail, at least I can't blame anyone. You know, at least I did it.
Right.
You know, and it's true. We do like to do that. Which leads to the other part. If you follow God's will or follow God's decision making this way and it fails, or at least in your eyes, then you blame God? You know, is the question, because naturally we might blame Him.
Right.
But remember, He's taking that bigger picture and says, this failure actually prepared you for this success down here that you can't even see the beginning of yet.
That's right.
You know, and it's made you more godly and more Christ-like, and you don't even know that yet as you walk through this process. Because He doesn't promise success with every decision. He promises to be there, and He promises to shape you, and He promises to walk through that in those times. But yeah, we constantly want to control it ourselves. So I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I guess God's will for us is to surrender and trust Him with our lives. Simple.
Mm-hmm.
Whom we marry, where we live, what job we take, how many children we have, how we pursue our dreams is not insignificant, but it's not nearly as significant
to do that as we're making decisions, as we're struggling through decisions, as we're,
Right.
we can glorify His name when we struggle through those things. We can bless other people as we're still struggling through decisions and working on different things. And we can put it in practice in the smaller decisions in life.
And then, having done it ourselves, we can encourage others
Yes.
who are also struggling.
Yeah, that's the important part about being around the council people is most likely they will then ask you, and you have wisdom to give to them, and you work that way as well, and that's part of glorifying His name. Even co-workers or other people that are not believers could ask you.
That's right.
And that not only gives you a chance to impart wisdom, but to also impart the gospel truth within that.
Right.
And so there you are again, glorifying His name in the midst of these different decisions.
Yeah.
So I think it gives us a lot to think about. We'll put these links in there, and we'll put the title of the book in there down in the description as well. But we'd love to hear from you again. Just let us know what is one of the most difficult decisions you made, or what is one way that God has helped you understand a decision to make. Until then, next week and for the next couple of weeks, I think we're talking about the challenges of healthy living.
Yes.
Mind, body, and soul. We'll go that through a couple of weeks, and we look forward to doing that. Until then, you have a blessed day, and we will see you soon.
Take care.